Welcome to London, 1383. Close your eyes, get comfortable under your luxurious synthetic temperature-regulated blanket, and prepare to realize exactly how soft the modern world has made you. If you survived the night without catching the sweating sickness or being bit by a rat the size of a corgi, congratulations, you made it to morning. But don't expect a gentle smartphone alarm playing lo-fi beats to wake you up. Your medieval alarm clock is a glorious combination of a depressed rooster, a neighbor screaming about the price of turnips, and the distinctive acoustic splash of a wooden chamber pot being emptied directly out of a second-story window onto the unpaved street below. There is no snooze button here. If you try to sleep in, the dampness of your straw mattress, which is currently living rent-free with a thriving community of fleas, will eventually force you upright. The air in your room doesn't smell like lavender or freshly brewed espresso. It smells like wet wool, wood smoke, and the collective unwashed sins of the 6 other people sharing your floor space. You are awake, it is freezing, and your day has officially begun. Now that you are out of bed, it's time to pick out your outfit. Strip away any wild fantasies of silk robes or elegant tunics. Your wardrobe for the day consists of heavy, coarse wool that feels exactly like sandpaper and has never seen a washing machine because those won't be invented for another 500 years. First, you have to put on your linen undergarments. If you were planning on wearing comfortable, supportive modern underwear, think again. You are essentially wrapping yourself in a giant linen diaper tied with a string. Next comes the wool tunic, which has absorbed every ounce of sweat you've generated since last winter. Finally, you lace up your shoes. They are made of flat, UN-cushioned leather with zero arch support. There is no left or right shoe, they are completely identical, meaning both of your feet will be equally miserable by noon. You don't look like a dashing knight, you look like an extra in a movie about a peasant village that gets burned down in the first 5 minutes. But hey, at least you're dressed. Before you head out into the chaotic, muddy maze of the city, you need some fuel. Walk over to the dark corner of your hut and look for breakfast. There are no avocados to toast, no oat milk lattes, and definitely no cereal. Your options are beautifully simple, a chunk of rye bread that is so stale and hard it could easily be used as a defensive weapon in a street fight. This bread is baked with a generous amount of sawdust and gravel because the local baker likes to stretch his profits, so try not to chip a tooth. To wash down this culinary masterpiece, you reach for a clay jug of small beer. Do not drink the water. If you drink the water from the Thames or the local wells, your digestive system will violently mutiny against you before lunch. The beer is weak, warm, and slightly chunky, but it is technically fermented enough to not kill you immediately. You take a bite of your gravel bread, a swill of your warm beer, and realize that survival in the 14th century is less about thriving and more about playing a very slow, very boring game of avoiding dysentery. Now that you've choked down your sawdust bread, it's time to step outside and experience the morning commute. Take a deep, relaxing breath and imagine stepping directly into a thick, calf-deep soup of pure, unadulterated street sludge. There are no paved sidewalks or asphalt roads in 1383's London. The street is a shared public space consisting of churned-up dirt, horse manure, rotting vegetable discarded by market sellers, and whatever contents of the chamber pots missed the gutters. To make things even more exciting, the city council has repeatedly banned people from letting their pigs roam freely through the streets, a rule that absolutely everyone is completely ignoring. You have to navigate this obstacle course while dodging aggressive stray dogs, heavy wooden carts with zero brakes, and fellow citizens who are just as irritable and sleep-deprived as you are. There are no traffic laws, no crosswalks, and if a wealthy merchant on a horse splashes a gallon of toxic mud all over your only wool tunic, your only legal recourse is to stand there and silently curse his entire family lineage. Congratulations, you've made it to your day job. Since you lack any modern digital skills, You are likely apprenticed to a local tradesman, and today we are visiting the glamorous world of the medieval tannery. As you walk into the workshop, the first thing that hits you isn't inspiration, it is a physical wall of stench so powerful it could strip paint. To turn raw cow hides into usable leather for boots and armor, the medieval tech stack relies on two primary ingredients: stale human urine and dog feces. Your job for the next several hours is to stand over a massive wooden vat, breathing in these fumes, while using a blunt iron blade to scrape bits of rotting fat off a dead animal's skin. There is no HR department to complain to about the working conditions. If you take a mental health day, your master will simply beat you with a piece of firewood and deduct it from your non-existent wages. There are no ergonomic chairs, no fluorescent lights, and definitely no break room with a water cooler. There is only you, a pile of wet hides, and the growing realization that your modern office job with its annoying emails was actually a utopian paradise. By midday, nature calls, forcing you to seek out one of London's public amenities. If you were hoping for a private stall with a locking door and scented air freshener, you are about to be profoundly disappointed. You head toward one of the public latrines built over London Bridge. The design is a masterpiece of medieval engineering, a long wooden bench with a row of circular holes cut into it, suspended directly over the roaring River Thames below. There is absolutely no privacy. You will sit shoulder to shoulder with three other guys named John, having a casual conversation about the price of wool while a freezing gale-force wind blows straight up through the hole, chilling your lower extremities. When you are finished, don't look around for soft, multiply toilet paper. Your options consist of a handful of dried moss, some rough straw, or if you're lucky, a communal sponge on a stick that has already been used by half the parish. You wipe, look down into the swirling brown waters of the river where the city gets its drinking water, and marvel at the sheer, terrifying miracle that humanity somehow managed to survive this century. By mid-afternoon, your stomach is growling again, and that morning rock of rye bread is a distant, painful memory. You decide to check out the local food stalls near Cheapside. If you're envisioning a charming medieval farmer's market with artisanal cheeses and organic produce, let's go ahead and shatter that illusion right now. You approach a local cookshop selling cheap meat pies, the medieval equivalent of a late-night drive-through. There are no health inspectors, no food grade ratings on the window, and absolutely no expiration dates. The cook is smiling, offering you a pie filled with beef that has a suspiciously grey tint to it. To mask the fact that the meat has been sitting on a wooden counter in the humidity for 3 days, the cook has aggressively smothered it in cheap, heavy spices like pepper and ginger. You take a bite. It's a literal lottery of food poisoning. If you're lucky, you just get a mild case of parasites. If you're unlucky, you spend the next 48 hours praying for a swift end. There are no napkins, no wet wipes, and you wipe the grease off your face with the same wool sleeve you used to clean cow hides earlier. Bon appetit! It's 3 p.m., the exact time you'd normally hit the office break room for a caffeine pick-me-up. But in 1380s London, there is no coffee, no energy drinks, and the sky has turned into a bleak, permanent shade of dishwater grey. The air quality in the city during the afternoon isn't just bad, it is actively hostile. Everyone is burning sea coal and damp wood in open hearths to keep warm, creating a thick, toxic blanket of black smog that hangs over the narrow streets. It stings your eyes, coats the back of your throat in soot, and ensures that everyone has a permanent, hacking cough. There are no cozy, heated indoor spaces to escape to. Unless you are the King of England, your afternoon consists of standing in a drafty workshop with a dirt floor, watching your fingers turn a delightful shade of blue from the damp chill. You can't scroll through social media to distract yourself, so you just stand there, inhaling carbon monoxide, staring at a stone wall, and wondering if anyone would notice if you just lay down in the mud and took a permanent nap. Let's say the toxic smog and grey meat pies have given you a massive, throbbing headache. In the modern world, you take 2 ibuprofen and lie down. In medieval London, you visit the local barber surgeon for some premium healthcare. You walk into his shop, which is easily identifiable by the row of bowls filled with congealed human blood sitting on the windowsill to advertise his services. The barber doesn't have a medical degree, he learned his trade by practicing on sheep and cutting hair. You tell him your head hurts. He nods wisely, diagnoses you with an excess of black bile, and immediately reaches for his favorite tool, a rusty iron blade used for bloodletting. Before you can run away, you are strapped into a wooden chair. He slices open a vein in your arm and lets a pint of your blood drain into a bucket to restore your bodily humors. If that doesn't cure your migraine, his backup plan is to bring out a jar of hungry, slimy leeches and attach them to your forehead. There is no anesthesia, no sanitized equipment, and the doctor's hands are covered in the hair of the guy he just shaved. It's a miracle of modern science that anyone walked out of there alive. If you think modern consumer protection laws or returning an item to Amazon is annoying, let's look at the strictly regulated, highly litigious reality of shopping in 1380s Cheapside. The city government wasn't playing around when it came to trade fraud. If a medieval baker tried to rip you off by adding sawdust to your loaf or making it underweight, they didn't just get a bad review on Yelp. The city authorities would strap the offending baker to a wooden frame called a hurdle, tie the ruined bread around his neck, and have a horse drag him through the filthiest, mud-soaked streets of London for everyone to laugh at. Vintners who sold sour, watered-down wine were forced to drink their own toxic sludge in public, and whatever was left over was poured directly onto their heads. While it's comforting to know you wouldn't get ripped off on the price of oats, the sheer level of public screaming, fighting, and literal street dragging makes your local supermarket look like a tranquil yoga studio. It's getting dark, and in 14th century London, the concept of a fun nightlife does not exist unless your idea of fun is being arrested by an aggressive parish constable. As the sun sets, the massive bronze bells of St. Martin le Grand begin to toll for curfew. This isn't a friendly suggestion. The moment those bells stop ringing, the heavy iron-bolted gates of London, Newgate, Ludgate, and Bishopsgate are slammed shut and locked, trapping everyone inside or outside exactly where they stand. Taverns are legally required to shut their doors immediately, and all citizens must put out their home fires, a practice called Curfew, which literally means cover fire, to stop the timber and plaster houses from burning down while people sleep. If you are caught wandering the pitch-black, unlit streets after the bell without a legally valid reason and a giant torch in your hand, the city's night watch will immediately assume you are a thief, beat you with a wooden staff, and throw you into a freezing stone lockup called the Tun until morning. Let's say you didn't listen to the curfew bell, got into a massive argument with a local butcher, and things turned violent. In the 1380s, you couldn't call a lawyer. You had to navigate a highly specific, totally accurate legal loophole called the right of sanctuary. If you committed a crime, your best bet for survival was running as fast as your flimsy leather shoes could carry you into the nearest consecrated church before the constables caught you. Once your foot crossed the threshold, the law couldn't touch you for exactly 40 days. The catch? You were completely trapped inside a stone building with nothing to eat but whatever the monks felt like throwing at you. Before the 40 days expired, you had to make a choice, face a medieval trial, or confess to the coroner and choose to abjure the realm. If you chose exile, the law required you to strip down to your linen underwear, hand over every single piece of property you owned, take off your shoes, and walk barefoot across England to a designated port while holding a small wooden cross. If you stepped off the highway for even a second, anyone was legally allowed to chop your head off. If you think dietary restrictions or trying to eat plant-based for a week is a challenge, let's look at the strictly enforced culinary calendar of the 1380s. Thanks to church law, which was fully backed by the king, eating meat was strictly illegal on Fridays, Saturdays, and the entire 40 days of Lent. This meant that for over half the year, your menu was dictated by religious decree, and violating it could land you in a public pillory. Since fresh fish from the Thames was expensive, your protein of choice on these days was something called stockfish. This wasn't a delicate fillet of cod, it was Atlantic whitefish that had been air-dried in Scandinavia until it lost all its moisture and became entirely rock-hard. To make stockfish remotely edible, you couldn't just pop it in a microwave. You had to place the dried fish on a wooden block and beat it aggressively with a heavy iron mallet for up to an hour just to break up the wooden fibers. Only then could you boil it into a gelatinous, foul-smelling mush. Take a deep, relaxing breath, imagine the soothing, rhythmic sound of a mallet smashing a dried fish carcass at 6 a.m., and be grateful for your modern grocery store. Let's talk about where all that digested stockfish actually went. In 14th century London, houses didn't have indoor plumbing, they had cesspits, essentially deep, unlined stone holes dug beneath the floorboards or in the backyard to collect the household's waste. To prevent the entire city from turning into an unlivable hazard, London relied on a highly specific guild of workers known as gong firmers or cesspit cleaners. By strict royal decree, these men were legally only allowed to work between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. This was done so the wealthy citizens wouldn't have to look at or smell the giant wooden waste carts during the daytime. The gong firmers were actually paid exceptionally high wages because the job was incredibly dangerous, workers occasionally asphyxiated from the concentrated methane gas buildup inside the pits. So, as you drift off to sleep in your clean, climate-controlled room, imagine the ultimate historical graveyard shift, navigating a pitch-black alley by torchlight, lifting up a neighbor's floorboards, and scooping out liquid filth into a wooden barrel while the rest of the city slept. It's Sunday afternoon, your one designated day of rest from the tannery, and you want to blow off some steam. If you think you're going to kick a leather ball around the parish with your friends, you are technically committing a crime. In 1388, King Richard II passed the Statute of Cambridge, which officially banned the playing of traditional football, dice, and tennis. Medieval football wasn't an organized sport with rules, it was essentially a massive, violent riot between entire villages where hundreds of men kicked a pig's bladder through the streets, resulting in broken limbs, shattered shop windows, and occasional fatalities. The Crown didn't ban it because it was dangerous, though, they banned it because it was distracting men from the English longbow. By law, every able-bodied lower-class male between the ages of 16 and 60 was legally required to spend their Sunday afternoons practicing archery at the local targets, known as the butts. If you were caught slacking or trying to play a casual game of dice instead of pulling a 100-pound draw-weight yew bow until your fingers bled, you would be heavily fined by the parish constable. Let's say you're trying to sleep, but you hear someone screaming about a fire down the street. In 1380s London, this was the ultimate nightmare scenario. Because the city was packed with timber and thatch houses built so close together that the upper stories practically touched across the narrow lanes, a single rogue spark from a baker's oven could incinerate an entire parish by morning. If you think a fire truck is going to show up with sirens and high-pressure hoses, let's bring you back to reality. London had no fire department. Instead, by royal decree, every citizen was legally required to keep a large barrel of water outside their door during the summer months. If a major fire broke out, the primary method of firefighting wasn't putting the water on the fire, it was tearing down the surrounding houses to create a fire break. Neighbors would show up carrying fire hooks, massive, heavy iron hooks attached to long ropes. They would literally hook the roof of the house next to the burning building and pull the entire structure down into the street to stop the flames from spreading. So, if your house caught fire, your neighbors wouldn't save your home, they would aggressively demolish it for the greater good. Let's say you've managed to save up a few silver groats from your terrible job, and you want to buy a nice, fancy outfit to show off at the market. In the 14th century, you couldn't just wear whatever you could afford. The English crown enforced strict legislation known as the sumptuary laws, which dictated exactly what you could wear based on your precise social and economic status. Passed by Parliament to prevent the lower classes from dressing like nobility, these laws made it a literal crime for a peasant or a low-ranking artisan to wear expensive fabrics like silk, velvet, or cloth of gold. You were also legally banned from wearing premium furs like ermine or marten. Your social class was strictly restricted to cheap lambskin or rabbit fur. Even the ridiculous, ultra-trendy pointed shoes of the era, known as cracos or poulaines, were heavily regulated. If the point of your shoe extended more than a few inches past your toe, and you weren't a knight or a nobleman, the parish authorities would hit you with a massive fine. It was state-sponsored fashion policing, designed to make sure you always looked exactly as poor as you actually were. If you think starting an entry-level position or a modern corporate internship is brutal, let's look at the legally binding reality of climbing the career ladder in medieval London. To enter any skilled trade or guild, whether you wanted to be a goldsmith, a grocer, or a fishmonger, you had to sign a legal contract called an indenture, binding yourself to a master craftsman for at least 7 long years. During this apprenticeship, you didn't get paid a single penny. You were legally considered the household property of your master. The contract strictly controlled your entire personal life. You were legally forbidden from getting married, gambling with cards or dice, visiting taverns, or even leaving your master's house after dark without written permission. If your master fed you rotting cabbage, made you sleep on a drafty dirt floor, and decided to beat you with a wooden rod for making a mistake, the city courts completely backed him up. The law allowed masters to use reasonable chastisement on their apprentices, meaning as long as they didn't break your limbs or kill you, you had zero legal recourse. If you couldn't take the abuse and tried to run away, you were classified as a fugitive, hunted down by the city constables, and thrown into the notorious Newgate prison. Take a moment to appreciate your modern kitchen tap. In your world, hydration requires nothing more than a lazy flick of your wrist. In 1380s London, if you wanted a single drop of water that wasn't pulled directly from the toxic, sewage-filled River Thames, you had to hike over to the Great Conduit in Cheapside. The conduit was a large stone house containing a cistern that piped in fresh spring water from Tyburn via underground lead pipes. It was the absolute focal point of urban drama. Because it was the only source of clean, free water in the city, the lines were utterly legendary. You would stand there for an hour in the freezing rain, gripping a heavy wooden jug called a tine, while arguing with professional water carriers, known as cobs, who aggressively tried to monopolize the pipes to sell water to wealthy households. The city council had to pass strict, historically verified laws banning people from washing dirty clothes, scaling fish, or letting their horses drink directly from the conduit. If you got caught trying to cut the line or illegally tapping the lead pipes to get water sent directly to your house, you would be forced to sit in the public pillory with your forged pipes hanging around your neck while angry citizens pelted you with rotten onions. Imagine you are finally tucked into your lumpy straw bed, drifting off to sleep, when suddenly you hear someone violently screaming in the alleyway. In the 14th century, you couldn't just ignore it, lock your door, and let the authorities handle it. London had no professional police force, meaning law enforcement was entirely crowdsourced through a legal system known as the hue and cry. By royal decree, if a citizen witnessed a theft or an assault, they were legally required to open their mouth and raise the cry, shouting at the absolute top of their lungs. The moment you heard that cry, sleep time was officially over. Every single able-bodied male within earshot was legally obligated to drop whatever they were doing, run out into the dark streets, join the screaming chorus, and physically chase down the suspect. If you decided to stay cozy under your blanket and pretend you didn't hear it, the city coroner would investigate the next morning. If the parish found out you ignored the hue and cry, the entire neighborhood would be hit with a massive collective fine that would wipe out your non-existent savings. It was a mandatory, high-stress game of community tag, where the penalty for sleeping in was criminal complicity. Let's say you've been working exceptionally hard at the tannery, and you decide it's time to sit down with your master and negotiate a well-deserved cost-of-living raise. In the late 14th century, this wasn't just corporate taboo, it was a literal statutory crime. Following the massive labor shortages caused by the Black Death, peasants and laborers suddenly realized they had leverage and started demanding better pay. The ruling elite absolutely panicked and passed the Statute of Labours. This law made it strictly illegal for any laborer, carpenter, or mason to accept, or even ask for, wages higher than what people were making back in 1346. If your master offered you a bonus, or if you tried to leave your job to go to a neighboring town that promised better pay, you were legally classified as a rogue. The punishment? You would be hunted down, thrown into a pair of heavy wooden stocks in the market square, and in extreme cases, you would be branded on the forehead with a hot iron F for falsity. So, sit back, relax, and realize that your modern corporate review cycle is actually a peaceful walk in the park compared to a system where asking for a performance bonus could get you physically labeled a criminal for life. So, you've crawled back into your lumpy straw mattress, completely exhausted from a day of inhaling dog feces tannery fumes, chasing criminals during a mandatory midnight sprint, and avoiding toxic grey meat pies. You close your eyes, wrap your sandpaper wool blanket tightly around your chin, and pray to every medieval saint you can name that your roof doesn't leak or catch fire before dawn. Congratulations, you officially survived 24 hours as a regular lower-class laborer in 1380s London. It wasn't a grand, cinematic adventure filled with chivalry, it was just a grueling, highly regulated marathon of mud, stale bread, and trying not to get dragged through the streets by a horse. Take a deep, relaxing breath, celebrate the absolute luxury of your modern mattress, and let that peasant life fade into the fog. Because it's time to completely flip the script. Let's see how much better life is when you aren't a peasant, but instead a member of the ultra-wealthy, incredibly corrupt, and highly toxic 1% of the 14th century. Spoiler alert, the food is better, but the threat of random decapitation goes up by about 1,000%. Welcome to the High Life, 1386, Mayor Brember, and the oligarchy. Forget the dirt floor and the communal sponge on a stick. You are now waking up in the year 1386, inside a massive, multi-story stone mansion on Milk Street. You are a fabulously wealthy merchant politician, a member of the elite Grocers Guild, and a close personal ally of London's notoriously corrupt mayor, Sir Nicholas Brember. Your morning alarm isn't a neighbour screaming about turnips, it's your personal liveried servant softly shuffling across your French-imported tiled floor to hand you a cup of sweet, spiced wine called Apprentices. You don't wear coarse wool, your morning gown is made of expensive Italian silk lined with imported Baltic squirrel fur. But don't get too comfortable under your feather duvet. Being rich in 1386 London means you are trapped in a vicious, highly dangerous political turf war. Mayor Brember has essentially turned the city into a corporate oligarchy, aggressively rigging elections and using armed thugs to suppress the rival non-Victualling guilds led by John of Northampton. Every single day is a high-stakes game of political survival. You aren't worrying about dysentery anymore, you're worrying about whether your political rivals are currently paying an assassin to slip arsenic into your morning wine. It's dinner time, and as a medieval great man, you need to throw a massive feast to flex your astronomical wealth on your political allies. Forget the rock-hard rye bread and boiled stockfish. Your table is loaded with historically accurate culinary absurdities designed purely for aristocratic bragging rights. The first course arrives, and it's a roasted peacock. The chef didn't just cook it, he carefully skinned the bird before roasting, stuffed it with expensive spices like saffron and galingale, and then literally sewed the feathers and head back onto the cooked carcass so it looks alive when it's served. To make it even more ridiculous, the beak has been stuffed with a piece of wool soaked in spirits and set on fire, so your dinner is literally breathing flames as it's carried into the hall. You also have a dish called blank manger, a sweet, thick sludge made of shredded capon boiled with rice, sugar, and almond milk, which was the ultimate status symbol because sugar had to be imported all the way from Cyprus. You consume this flaming, sugary meat spectacle while a minstrel plays a lute in the background, fully aware that the money spent on this single dinner could have fed an entire peasant parish for a year. You smile, take a bite of your golden, saffron-stained food, and try to forget the fact that the king's uncles are currently plotting a military coup that could get you and Mayor Brember hanged by next winter. If you think modern political campaigns are toxic and full of gerrymandering, let's look at how you and plutocrat buddy, Mayor Nicholas Brember, secured your grip on London's Guildhall. In the 1380s, municipal politics wasn't a matter of polite debates, it was an aggressive corporate turf war between the victualling guilds, the food monopolies like your fellow grocers and fishmongers, and the non-victualling guilds, the clothing trades like the drapers and mercers led by your arch-rival, John of Northampton. To ensure the non-food peasants didn't vote in a mayor who would lower your profit margins, Brember didn't bother with elegant political attack ads. Instead, during the mayoral elections, he literally filled the Guildhall with armed enforcers smuggled in from Middlesex. Any draper or mercer who showed up to vote for John of Northampton was met at the door by a wall of guys holding heavy iron axes and swords, who politely suggested they go home if they valued their kneecaps. Northampton was arrested, stripped of his property, and exiled to a prison in Tintagel. Take a long, soothing breath, visualize the pure, uncorrupted majesty of 14th century democracy, and sleep soundly knowing your monopolies are secure for another fiscal year. It's 1387, and you need to manage your investment portfolio. In the modern world, high net worth individuals invest in real estate or index funds. In the 14th century, the ultimate high-risk, high-reward play was acting as a personal venture capitalist for the volatile, 20-year-old King Richard II. Richard is notoriously broke, universally loathed by his powerful uncles, and desperately needs cash to fund his lavish lifestyle and his highly unpopular inner circle. This is where you and Nicholas Brember step in. You advance the crown a massive loan of several £1,000s, an astronomical sum that keeps the royal court afloat. In exchange, Richard grants your guild total control over the wool customs, the single most lucrative tax engine in the entire Kingdom of England. You are essentially farming the state's tax revenue for pure profit. You sit back in your velvet chair, listening to the soft, rhythmic clinking of silver groats being poured into your iron-bound vault, while completely ignoring the massive red flag that you have just financially tied yourself to a monarch who is actively driving the country toward a civil war. What could possibly go wrong? It's November 1387, and the political chicken has officially come home to roost. If you're feeling a bit of late afternoon anxiety, that's completely normal because the king's heavily armed aristocratic opposition, known as the Lords Appellant, led by the Duke of Gloucester and the Earl of Arundel, have just mobilized their private armies. They are absolutely furious about the king's corruption, his terrible favorites, and specifically, the wealthy London merchant oligarchs who have been bankrolling him. The appellants have marched straight to Waltham Cross and formally appealed you, Mayor Brember, and the rest of the royal favourites of high treason. Your cosy Milk Street mansion suddenly feels like a gilded trap. The city gates you once controlled are now being watched by hostile enforcers, and the king's favourite military commander, Robert de Vere, is currently fleeing for his life after getting utterly crushed at the Battle of Radcot Bridge. You can't liquidate your assets, you can't call an embassy for political asylum, and as you try to rest your head on your imported feather pillow, the only thing you can think about is whether the scratching sound outside your window is a harmless alley cat or a squad of the Duke of Gloucester's knights coming to drag you to the Tower of London. The cold reality of political alignment has finally shattered your comfortable existence. It is February 1388, and the iron hand of the Lord's Appellant has clamped down tightly upon the city. You are no longer lounging in your fine stone mansion on Milk Street, draped in silk and sipping imported wine. Instead, you, alongside Sir Nicholas Brember and the other high-ranking plutocrats of the food guilds, have been seized by armed guards and thrown directly into the damp, shadow-draped stone chambers of the Tower of London. There are no servants to stoke your fire or smooth your velvet cushions here. As a grand magnate of the city, your wealth means absolutely nothing to the guards who lock the heavy oak doors. Your daily view has transitioned from the bustling markets of Cheapside to the bleak, sweating stone walls of a fortress. You sit in the dark, shivering in your fur-lined surcoat, listening to the echoing footsteps of the sentries outside. The grand financial schemes you concocted with the young King Richard II have dissolved into thin air. You are completely cut off from your merchant fleet, your warehouses of valuable wool, and your ledger books. Your only companion is the growing, terrifying realization that when the great men of the realm decide to purge the palace, the wealthy merchant princes are always the first to be crushed underfoot. The day of reckoning has arrived, and you are marched under heavy guard into the cavernous, draughty expanse of Westminster Hall. This is the gathering of what history will forever remember as the merciless Parliament, and the atmosphere inside is thick with pure, aristocratic hatred. The Duke of Gloucester and his fellow barons sit upon high benches, staring down at you and Mayor Brember with total contempt. A clerk steps forward, unrolling a massive parchment scroll to read the charges of high treason. The legal system of the nobility is beautifully rigged. You are not permitted a defense counsel, you are not allowed to call witnesses, and your accusers are the very individuals acting as your judges. Brember attempts to defend his honor by offering to engage in a wager of battle, offering to fight his accusers in single combat to prove his innocence. The barons don't even bother to hide their laughter. To the highborn magnates, a merchant trying to invoke the chivalric right of trial by combat is the height of absurdity. They don't want a fair fight, they want your wealth forfeited to the crown and your influence permanently erased from the realm. It is February 20th, 1388, a bleak and freezing morning that marks the definitive end of your political ambitions. The sentence has been handed down, and it is absolute. Sir Nicholas Brember is strapped tightly to a wooden hurdle, the exact same humiliating device used to drag fraudulent bakers through the mud, and pulled by horses through the crowded, mocking streets of London toward the execution grounds at Tyburn. The very citizens who used to bow to the mayor in the streets now stand in the freezing muck, jeering and throwing rotten turnip skins at the fallen plutocrat. The journey is slow, agonizing, and entirely public, designed to show every person in the kingdom exactly what happens to great men who fly too close to the royal sun. At Tyburn, beneath the heavy grey sky, the executioner stands ready. There is no dignified block or quick axe for a merchant prince. Brember is hanged by the neck, a grim and public spectacle to satisfy the anger of the barons. Your grand faction has been utterly dismantled, your gold vaults have been emptied into the royal treasury, and the cutthroat game of 14th century politics has claimed its ultimate price. Take a deep, tranquil breath, close your eyes, and let the terrifying drama of the medieval elite fade into the shadows of history. We advance to the year 1392. You have successfully survived the bloody baronial purges of 1388, maintained a low profile, and steadily rebuilt your vast mercantile fortune. You are once again a senior alderman, a grand magnate of the highest order. But you are about to watch the entire autonomy of the city vanish into thin air because of a literal loaf of horse bread. A petty royal servant named Romain is walking down Fleet Street when he decides to casually steal a loaf of horse bread, low-grade fodder baked with bean husks and chaff, strictly meant for animals, from a baker's basket. The baker does not seek out a parish constable. He immediately retrieves a heavy iron axe and cleaves it directly into the royal servant's skull. The wounded man flees into sanctuary, a massive riot erupts outside, and King Richard II receives the exact pretext he has been hunting for. The king claims the city is in a state of utter, lawless misgovernment. In reality, he is simply furious because you and your fellow plutocrats recently refused to grant his treasury a massive loan. The great men of the city are about to learn a brutal lesson in royal extortion. King Richard II executes a devastating political maneuver. He does not merely arrest your current mayor, John Hend, he completely revokes London's ancient royal charter, stripping the citizens of their hard-won liberties, their self-governance, and their right to choose their own magistrates. To truly bleed the merchant princes dry, the king commands the Court of Common Pleas, the Court of Chancery, and the Exchequer to pack up their parchment scrolls and move entirely out of London to the northern city of York. Virtually overnight, your primary source of revenue, the hundreds of wealthy earls, barons, church prelates, and wealthy litigants who flock to London to settle legal disputes and purchase luxury goods, vanishes to the north. London's commerce plummets into the abyss. You are left standing in an empty market, staring at your unsold piles of iron and wool, while a royally appointed warden rules the city with absolute authority. Even your prominent guild brother, the ironmonger Gilbert Magfeld, is forced to collaborate with the royal administration as a newly designated sheriff just to keep his enterprise from collapsing under the financial strain. By August 1392, the plutocrats and great men of London realize that playing hardball with a volatile monarch is utterly ruinous to the ledger books. To regain your liberties, you must buy your way back into the royal graces. The city council organizes the most absurdly expensive, sycophantic reconciliation pageant in English history. When King Richard and Queen Anne ride in state through the city gates, you and a 4-mile-long procession of the trade guilds line the streets, completely unarmed and dripping with forced humility. You present the king with 2 massive silver basins overflowing with gold coins, an exquisite golden crown for the queen, and a host of unimaginable luxury gifts. In a beautifully orchestrated piece of political theatre, Queen Anne publicly drops to her knees before the king, begging him to show mercy to his erring subjects. Richard graciously accepts your staggering £10,000 gift, restores the city's charter, and permits the royal courts to return from York. You are financially drained, profoundly humiliated, and thoroughly extorted, but your precious liberties have been restored. We move forward to the year 1397. King Richard II has officially entered his period of absolute tyranny, and he has completely ceased pretending to respect the traditional rights of the city. When the sitting mayor of London dies in office, the king does not allow you and your fellow aldermen to hold an election. Instead, he simply imposes his own choice upon the city, the famously wealthy silk merchant and grand plutocrat, Richard Whittington. While Whittington is an exceptionally capable administrator, even his immense diplomatic skill cannot shield the great men of the city from the king's newest, most cynical financial extortion scheme, the notorious blank charters or ragman bonds. The king's royal officers arrive at the Guildhall bearing stacks of completely blank pieces of parchment. Under the direct threat of death, imprisonment, and the total forfeiture of your family's property, you and the other grand magnates are commanded to affix your official wax seals to the bottom of these empty pages. The king's clerks can later write down whatever astronomical sum of gold they desire above your seal, and your ledger books are legally bound to pay it. It is a masterpiece of royal despotism, forcing the proudest merchant princes of the realm to blindly sign away their fortunes just to keep their heads attached to their shoulders. By 1398, the atmosphere within the private chambers of the Guildhall is thick with a silent, sweat-inducing panic. You sit at the council table alongside Mayor Whittington, picking half-heartedly at a luxurious dish of saffron-stained venison, but your appetite is entirely ruined. The immense wealth the king extorted from your blank charters has been used to hire a massive private army of abusive Cheshire archers. These soldiers wear the king's personal badge of the White Hart and patrol the streets of London, treating the citizens and the great men alike like conquered foreign subjects. Every time you look out the window of your stone mansion, you see prominent noblemen and rival magnates being summarily arrested, exiled, or stripped of their titles. The king has become entirely volatile, refusing to listen to his traditional councillors and relying solely on a small circle of sycophantic court favourites. You quickly realize that your vast warehouses of imported Baltic timber and your ships full of wool are no longer signs of security, they are merely large targets for an unpredictable crown. You retire to your goose-feather bed each night, thoroughly aware that a single rogue rumour could reduce you from a grand plutocrat to an absolute beggar by morning. In the summer of 1399, the ultimate opportunity for a calculated political pivot arrives. While King Richard II is away on a disastrous military campaign in Ireland, his exiled cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, lands on the northern coast with a private army and a determination to reclaim his confiscated lands. The great men and plutocrats of London do not hesitate for a single moment to protect their investments. You immediately cease praying for Richard's safety, order your servants to rip the White Hart badges off their liveries, and throw open the heavily fortified gates of London to welcome Bolingbroke with open arms and deep purses. You and Richard Whittington quickly arrange a massive loan from the city treasury to finance Bolingbroke's march to seize the crown. King Richard is captured, stripped of his royal robes, and dragged back to London to be locked away in the dark dampness of Pontefract Castle, where he will soon mysteriously starve to death. You sit back in your carved oak chair, calmly update your financial ledgers to reflect the new reign of King Henry IV, and marvel at how smoothly the merchant princes can depose a tyrannical sovereign when the security of their commerce is on the line. You have barely had time to adjust your velvet robes under the new reign of King Henry IV before the absolute chaos of royal politics smashes through your front door once again. It is January 1400, and a group of disgruntled earls loyal to the late, starved Richard II have hatched a conspiracy known as the Epiphany Rising. Their brilliant plan? To sneak into Windsor Castle during a mummers' play, assassinate the new king and his sons, and throw the realm right back into a bloody civil war. The plot leaks, the king flees to London in the dead of night, and suddenly you, Mayor Whittington, and the rest of the city aldermen are dragged out of your comfortable feather beds at 2 a.m. You aren't reaching for ledger books, you are reaching for your imported steel breastplate. By royal command, the great men of the city must immediately rouse the London militia. Within mere hours, you have organized 6,000 heavily armed citizens to guard the city walls and secure the tower. The rebellion is swiftly crushed, and the conspirators' severed heads are soon decorating the pikes on London Bridge. You stand on the battlements, staring at the grim display, realizing that financing a new dynasty means you are now the permanent, high-stress security detail for an incredibly unstable throne. We advance to the year 1406. Richard Whittington has been chosen as mayor for a third time, and the grand plutocrats of the city are facing an entirely different kind of existential threat, the sheer, lethal stench of the lower classes. The city's primary dungeon, Newgate Gaol, has become so overcrowded with thieves, debtors, and political casualties that the conditions inside have turned genuinely apocalyptic. The air inside the stone fortress is so toxic and corrupted that the fetid atmosphere has begun wafting out of the iron grates, drifting directly into the nearby luxury markets and affluent residential wards. It is actively killing the gaolers, the prisoners, and, most terrifyingly to the Guildhall, several wealthy aldermen who happen to walk too close to the building. In a magnificent display of self-preservation disguised as Christian charity, Whittington and his council decree that the prison must be entirely demolished and rebuilt. Using his vast mercantile wealth, Whittington finances a new facility complete with a highly advanced, historically verified feature, a dedicated pipe system to flush waste away into the city ditch, alongside a clean water drinking fountain. You sleep soundly in your stone mansion, comforted by the knowledge that the poor are still safely locked away, but their desperate odor will no longer interfere with your afternoon banquet. It is the summer of 1415, and the brilliant young King Henry V has decided to revive the 100-year-old family tradition of invading France. There is only one minor issue: the royal coffers are completely empty, and an army of thousands of archers and men-at-arms does not work for free. The king rides straight to the Guildhall to meet with the grand magnates of London. Henry doesn't ask for a polite donation, he demands an astronomical loan of 10,000 marks. To secure this immense fortune from your tight-fisted mercantile council, the king is forced to turn the crown into a literal medieval pawn shop. He hands over his most sacred personal treasures as collateral. You and your guild brothers stand around a heavy oak table, coolly inspecting the actual crown jewels, gold tabernacles encrusted with sapphires, and the king's own magnificent silver-gilt flagons, all of which are locked tightly into your iron-bound merchant vaults as a security deposit. You authorize the release of the gold, thoroughly satisfied with the transaction. If the king triumphs at Agincourt, your ledgers will be handsomely repaid with French plunder. If he perishes on the battlefield, the merchant princes of London will legally own the literal crown of Great Britain. We reach the definitive conclusion of our journey through the corridors of medieval power in the year 1423. The legendary Richard Whittington, 3 times mayor, premier silk merchant, and the absolute apex plutocrat of London, has finally passed away. You stand alongside the city's common clerk, John Carpenter, in a draughty stone chamber to witness the execution of Whittington's immense final testament. In the 15th century, the great men of the realm do not leave their vast fortunes to their children to be squandered on fine wines and French dice. Instead, you use your accumulated mountain of gold to aggressively bribe the Almighty for a swift passage into heaven. Whittington's executors are tasked with distributing an astronomical fortune to fund massive public works, rebuilding the Guildhall Library, repairing the stone conduits of the city's water supply, and establishing almshouses for the destitute. This isn't done out of pure, modern altruism. According to the strictly calculated theology of the era, every single silver groat spent on civic charity serves to erase your sins, knocking centuries off your mandatory, agonizing sentence in the fires of purgatory. You look down at your own ink-stained fingers, mentally calculate the decades you've spent enforcing corrupt monopolies, rigging municipal elections, and extorting the lower classes, and realize you will likely need to pave the entirety of Middlesex just to balance your spiritual accounts. It is the perfect, cynical culmination of the medieval high life, spending an entire existence ruthlessly accumulating gold from the sweat of the peasantry, only to dump it all back into the city at the very end to ensure your soul doesn't roast for eternity. Close your eyes, take a slow, tranquil breath, and let the chaotic, cutthroat world of the 14th century plutocrats fade completely into the dark. Your modern ledgers are clear, your vault is secure, and you are entirely safe from the treacherous whims of kings, barons, and the city watch. Sleep well,